If you want, it's Emily Fox. Today's video is going to be all about books that I think are overhyped. So we're going to go through all the books that I've read on Goodreads, look at the average rating, and I'm going to let you know which ones my personal rating is lower or like much lower than the average. I think it's just fun normalizing not liking really popular books. It makes us all feel a bit more normal. This is technically part 2. I will link part 1 down below. I've also done the opposite, looked at the lowest rated books on average on Goodreads that I've read and that I personally think are still worth reading. So last time we stopped at an average of 4.28. It was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. So that one hurt, I know. We're gonna keep going. So the next one is actually going to be painful. Are you ready? The Princess Bride. The average rating is 4.26. I gave it 3 point something. Listen, I didn't grow up reading the book or watching the movie. I knew nothing about it. Read it not that long ago, actually. And it was okay. I liked the humor. The story was fine. It does feel a little bit, okay, don't come for me, a little bit like a children's book for adult. But my main issue with the book was the double narration. It just got a bit too much for me. And at first, you know, there were some good moments, again, with the humor, but then I just kind of lost interest. So I just wasn't as invested as everyone else. I feel like everyone is so obsessed with it, and I just felt a bit indifferent. We started with a really intense one. The next one that I'm seeing is Blue Lily, Lily Blue, which is the third book in the Raven cycle. So we're going to talk about the whole trilogy. But that one also has an average of 4.26. I'm assuming the other ones are a little bit lower. I feel that's what happens, right? People, if you continue the series, it's because you've been enjoying it. And this is where I actually stopped reading the series. I just couldn't do it anymore. Yes, it's a YA kind of fantasy magical realism series, but I just was so not invested in it. I preferred the side characters, like the family, Blue's family. Was it Blue her first name? Her family, the witches. I wanted to know more about them. I really didn't care about the lions and like the Lost King. Did not care. The characters, I completely understand why people were invested. But again, Blue, not that much personally. So yeah, liked some of the characters, didn't care about the story at all. So I kind of just gave up at that point. I actually tried to read the whole series in a week, and after the third one, I was so done. I feel like the next one doesn't count. I don't know why it's showing up as read, because The Shining, I gave up on it. I tried it twice, just actually included it in a unhaul video. 4.26 also average rating. Couldn't finish it. The next one I'm seeing is going to be another controversial one. Again, 4.26 average rating on Goodreads. I gave it 2 stars. Dune. Yeah, this is probably one of the books that got me the most hate on Goodreads. I really don't care at this point, but I found it boring. The writing was so tedious. I didn't care that much about the story. It wasn't attached to characters. It was just so confusing. And like, people are always, oh, you should go back to reading like YA books or like 50 Shades of Grey. Actually, that's usually their main thing. Listen, I read a lot of sci-fi, and this just was boring to me. I also always joke about the fact that one of the main characters is called Jessica, which is just so weird in the context of the book because everyone's name is like super complicated or just weird. Idaho. But yeah, she's called Jessica. Anyway, I had issues with a lot of things in this book, but it was just not for me. And if you started it, couldn't finish it, I understand you. Actually, I had to switch to the audiobook to finish it. I really thought I was going to give it 5 stars. I actually kept it for when I was recovering from jaw surgery because I knew I would be out for like weeks, and I was like, I'm going to be able to enjoy it. And yeah, I hated it. So that was painful. Another popular one, Good Omens. I know, 4.25 average rating. I gave it 2 stars. Similarly to the other one, I feel like it's just a children's book for adult. I just couldn't get into it. Sure, once again, some of the humor was fine, but I just was not invested. I just finished it to finish it. I should have DNF'd it, but like, there's just so much hype that I thought I would love it too, and I really didn't care. Still at 4.25, we have Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. I don't think it's the most unpopular opinion though, because I remember when I reviewed it the first time in my wrap-up. Of course, Clawdia is playing with the microphone. This is the beast in question. Yes, when I reviewed it the first time, I remember people feeling very relieved that I also could not stand it. So you're not alone. This is essentially what this video is for, you know, just making you feel like it's okay. But yeah, I didn't care for it. Didn't care for the characters. Didn't care for the story. It was just, I swear, sometimes you read a book and you wonder if people read the same book as you. Like, do people feel forced to say they liked it because everyone is saying that they liked it? I'm half kidding here. I know some people did genuinely like it. I just really did not care for it. The next one I'm seeing, still an average of 4.25, is It by Stephen King. Also thought I was going to give 5 stars. This was in my phase. When was that? In 2016 or 17? 17. This is when I had just started BookTube and I was reading a lot of like the popular books and you think you're gonna love them. And I read a lot of Stephen King during that phase and I like the beginning. I do feel, generally speaking, the book is probably too long. Like, it's over 1,000 pages. But at first I did like it. Like, I do feel like he's almost a little too good at writing really messed up stuff that are horrifying and just freaking you out a little bit. I'll give him that. For that part, I didn't give it like 1 star. I gave it 3. But my main issue is, one, the ending sucked, which is classic Stephen King. And that scene in the sewer. I'm not gonna include spoilers. I can totally spoil it in the comment section if you want me to. But listen, there is a line. There is a line and it was crossed. Like way, way crossed in that scene. And it's not even just like putting things for the shock value, but it's also the fact that like it's just so pointless. Like, why? It was so dumb. Anyway, hated it obviously, but the book in general, again, I gave it 3 point something. It wasn't awful. Again, the beginning was strong, just questionable stuff. Quickly, I didn't hate that one, but The Hypnotist by Sanderson. I've realized that I don't really care for his YA books in general. Skyward, at least the first 2 books, is the exception so far, but this one is more middle grade, I feel like, than YA. I think my main issue is that I was disappointed that this wasn't an adult book. I feel like it could have been a really cool adult book because Magical School, the magic system is really interesting. People like draw things and like it can move on the floor, like they can attack each other. It's really cool. But my issue is, one, the main male character is teenage boys. You write them to be, I don't remember how old he was in there, but like he writes them to be like 14, 16, but they act like they're 10. And it's just so annoying, like the romance. No, I had the same issue with the Reckoners series by him. Awful when he writes teenage boys. There's also the fact that like the kid is basically investigating the murders and like who's trusting a child to do that? Like I understand it's a children's book, whatever, but like even in the context, it made no sense for that to be happening. So yeah, didn't really care for it. I gave it 3 point something. Again, didn't hate it, just I wish he had written it as an adult book. It could have been so good. We are now down at 4.24. I wanted to give a quick shout out to Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier, which I know. This is another one I was sure I was going to give it 5 stars. And it's not because it's a classic or anything. It's just that I was not invested. I didn't care at all about people being murdered or being accused of murder. I didn't care. Didn't care whatsoever. So I'm really sad. I have watched the movie My Cousin Rachel before I knew it was adapted from one of her books. And that one was so good that I'm waiting so I forget, hopefully, what the movie was about so I can enjoy it and see if I just don't like her as an author, just like the idea. I didn't even try the movie of this because I really didn't care for it. So I gave it 3 stars, probably a bit because of the pressure of liking it, but definitely lower than the 4.24. For a classic, that's actually really high. One book that I absolutely gave it a higher rating than I should have because of the pressure is Ready Player One. I gave it 3 stars. In my defense, it was in like 2016, so I had just started BookTube, but I did not care for it. It felt like, I feel like nowadays it's cool to hate it, but like didn't get all the references from, is it the 80s? Obviously wasn't born. Didn't care about the main male character, so cringy. It felt like fantasies, you know, is fantasies, which a lot of people can relate. Again, the whole 80s things, all the video games and movies and stuff. But I really, really didn't care. I'm surprised I gave it 3 stars, but again, the pressure. I doubt that I would give it more than 2 if I were to reread it, which I never will. 4.23 still, we have Daisy Jones and the Sex. Okay. I listened to it as an audiobook, which thankfully someone recommended that to me because I do feel like it reads much better that way because it's like interviews. But I didn't feel like it was nearly as good as Evelyn Hugo, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, which I had just read and loved. I did watch actually the TV show, which I did think was better than the movie, the book. But yeah, no hard feeling. I just felt like it felt like a skeleton of a story, which again, the format makes sense. It's interviews, and I feel like the TV show gave it justice. Although I do agree with the complaints that people said that some of the actors look like Instagram models, like it doesn't work with the context of the book, but it's okay. I wanted to say I still prefer the TV show over the book. I don't say that often. Still at 4.23, we have The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest, which is the third book in the Millennium series, which I frankly only really cared about the first book in the series, which can be read mostly as a standalone. So I would recommend doing that. But yes, the third book, I feel like in these kind of like old school murder mysteries, often you would see the male authors writing himself basically as the investigator, and it's 100% that, because he is so irresistible and like every female character has sex with him. And it's the third one is so cringy. Like the first one, it was there, but you're like, okay, whatever. But the third one, there's like a romance. It was bad. It was bad. And again, I didn't feel like the rest of the story supported the cringiness. Like the investigation was not as interesting as the first book. So yeah. So if you have still not read the series, which I read it really late too, just read the first one, honestly. Still at 4.23, the next one I'm seeing is Brent Weeks' The Black Prism. Yeah, I've talked about this one a lot. This specific book made it to my most disappointing book of 2017. The second book made it to my worst books of 2022. And both of them, and all of the books that I had by him, made it to my unhaul video that I posted a few days ago. So I am so done with him. I did give the first book 3 stars because, again, the pressure. But I went into it really expecting to give it 5 stars. And I was hit in the face by so much misogyny. Like, I don't need to know about the chest of every female character and being able to tell you who's the most attractive one in every room. Like, it was just a lot. And again, the story was not strong enough to compensate. And then book 2 was straight up offensive. The Dream Thieves. Here we go. The second book in the Raven Cycle, 4.23. Again, I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. The characters were likable, but meh. Ooh, the next one is gonna hurt. Still at 4.23. We have The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I know, another one that got me a good amount of hate on Goodreads. The comment section on there is rootless. If you don't like their favorite book, people are really offended. I gave it 2 stars. I was really bored. It's a short book, but I was bored. I did like the humor. I feel like that's usually what people come for. They're like, oh, you just didn't get the humor. I got it. I just didn't care. It's too absurd for me. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And I just wanted to include it. So now you know, if you also didn't like it, you're not alone. It happens. Yeah, I didn't care for it. Will not continue for sure. One I haven't talked about since I've read it in 2018. Theft of Swords, the first 2 books in the Raria Revelations by Michael Sullivan. I haven't seen that one on Goodreads or Booktube in years. I read it because I was seeing a lot. I was on a big fantasy kick. I was reading a lot of the favorite ones, and again, similar issues. It's written by a man, which I definitely have favorite male authors, but the same issues of like really cringy. It feels like teenage boy fantasy. Just like one of the first scenes, like these men arrive and people are trying to steal their stuff, and like he's being oh so cool and making them walk away. Like it just, it's fine if it worked for you, but it just took me out of story. And in this book, most of the female characters are sex workers, which, again, like, why is it always the case in these old school fantasy written by men? Like, they can be other things. They can. So yeah, just didn't care for it. At the time, I gave it 3 point something, but I wouldn't if I were to reread it now. Speaking of Brandon Sanderson, actually, we're on a kick. Still at 4.21. Read On, which is the novella between book 2 and 3 in the whole Skyward universe. I really didn't care. There were 2. I've read both, and I have yet to pick the third book up because I really didn't care about the short stories. They were really long, first of all. They were like 200 pages both, and you were following side characters, and one of them has a lot of romance, and the other one I just wasn't invested. I gave it 3 stars, but like, I regret reading them. They've made me not want to continue the series. At 4.20, we have A Room of One's Own by Virginia Woolf. Nonfiction. I read it for my Read It or Unhaul It challenge, actually the first one that I did this year. And I like some of her points, some I didn't really care for. Like older feminist works will be like that. So yeah, I don't regret reading it. I gave it 3 stars and the average again 4.20. So not a huge difference, but it wasn't as good as I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going to love this. I had seen like quotes of it, and reading the whole thing was tedious. The Toll by Neil Schusterman. This is the 3rd book in the Arc of a Sight series. It's a YA sci-fi series. The first book was actually really good. It took me by surprise by how like good it was. So if someone wants to read YA sci-fi, I definitely would recommend this one. It's like kind of the dystopian / utopian kind of book, version of a world where people don't die anymore, and like it's interesting. But the last book was so all over the place. It was a disappointment. It took me forever to actually read it. Probably deep down I knew. But yeah, I gave it 3 point something, and the average was 4.20. So not awful, just really didn't live up to its potential. Still at 4.20, we have A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. Yeah, this one, hype or not, I gave it 2 point something. I didn't care for it. I read it in 2017, so like there was a lot of pressure to love it, and I still couldn't do it. It was just like a really bad Hunger Games vibes a little bit in the first book. But I just couldn't understand why people shipped the romance. I hated it. So yeah, no. I did like the second book more, but I gave up after the 3rd book. So it's just not for me. Sarah J. Maas in general is not for me. But yeah, the first book was not good. I don't understand. The Testaments, which is the 2nd book in the Handmaid's Tale series, I gave it 2 stars. The average is 4.19. I found it boring. Yeah. I didn't really care for the first book either. I don't know where it is on that list, but I'm just telling you, if you found it kind of boring, me too. What are you doing? There's the mom. Next one I'm seeing, still at 4.19, we have 1984. Yeah. Again, another one that people on the internet will try to unalive you for not loving. I found it really boring personally, especially that chapter, like he's reading a book. So boring. I understand the messages. I understand that, you know how people are like, oh, you just didn't. I got it. It was just boring. I just didn't like it. So yeah, 3 stars. I think that was pretty generous. But yes, if you also didn't care for it, you're not alone. It's just, no. Still at 4.19, Dead Poets Society. I gave it 1 star. I have a feeling people didn't read the book. They just watched the movie and rated the book because it has some really questionable scenes that weren't in the movie. Like really questionable, like essay scenes. Like this book is marketed for 10 to 14-year-olds. And like, sure, that's something you can address if you read it in school, but like, it was just so not what I expected. Going back to Sarah J. Maas, Throne of Glass, I actually vlogged myself reading this, and it was such a shit show. My biggest issue with it is that there's a lot of telling, not showing. She's supposed to be such a good badass assassin, but she's so bad at it. Like at one point someone leaves like, is it candies or chocolate on her bed, and she eats it. People are trying to kill you and you're just like, ooh, mystery gift, let me eat it. And I just really didn't care for it. I did try book 2 and I just gave up on the series. That's the point. I gave up on the author in general. But yeah, I know it's kind of cool to hate her, but I really tried and I couldn't. So yeah, I give it 1 star. Yeah. Still at 4.19, we have Anxious People. That's a very popular one. I gave it 3 stars. I was not that emotionally invested. I do feel like that's a character-driven story, right? It's like a bunch of people that are locked into this room together because stuff. And I feel like it's a bit predictable, and I just, again, if you're not invested in characters, you're not really going to care about the story. So yeah, 3 stars. I think that was kind of generous on my side. I feel like in general, it's just going to divide people. Either an author you love or you don't. And I am kind of towards the don't. Oh, Sunreach, the other novella, at 4.18, and I gave it 3 stars, which again, kind of generous. Ooh, okay, another one that's going to hurt. Still at 4.18, The Silent Patient. I read it a while ago, 2019, and I feel like it's such a forgettable book that I would have to go and look into it to really figure out exactly what I hated. But from what I remember, I found it really predictable. I didn't like the twist, and I wasn't invested in the story. Didn't care for the writing either. I feel like mysteries, you have to have something, right, that you're into. And I just finished it, and I was so confused. Like, what did people like about it? What did he see that I didn't? Because still years later, 4.18 average rating. How many people read that? 1.5 million, almost 1.6 million people rated this on Goodreads. So it seems like I'm definitely the one with the unpopular opinion. But yeah, I gave it 2 stars. I thought it was a very mediocre book. Mediocre writing, characters, story, twist. None of it. Another mystery thriller. I stopped getting my recommendations from Goodreads, the popular ones, because The Good Sister, 4.18 also, and I gave it 2 stars. This is not a mystery thriller, okay? It's family drama, 100%. You have this young woman, her sister, you know that they've been through things, and they have this weird relationship, but the main character is probably on the spectrum. It's never really mentioned, and she just decides to get pregnant and give her baby to her sister. Like, none of this is appealing to me. It was my fault. I should have looked more into it. I just thought, oh, it's popular right now. I'm seeing it trend. Let me try it. Don't do that, Emily. The next one is going to be very painful, okay? I'm often asked, did you try this author? The first year trilogy, the first book, Assassin's Apprentice, 4.17. Yeah, Robin Hobb, I did try. I read the whole trilogy, and I tried to start another one by her, and no investment, no emotional investment. It's very character driven. There were some good moments, but generally speaking, for me, it's like a 3.5 stars max series. Like, it's just, yeah, I didn't care for any of it. Yeah. Trust me, it hurts me too. I really wanted to love her. The Moonlight Child, another mystery thriller that is a good example of why I don't trust Goodreads anymore. I give it 2 stars, average rating of 4.17. So forgettable. Okay, the next one, I 100% did it to myself. I am fully aware of it, but the third book in the selection series, let's talk about the whole series since we're here, but the third book got 4.16. I gave the whole series 2 stars, and again, I did it to myself. I binge read this, okay? My excuse is that I had the flu, which is true, but I read the whole trilogy in a weekend. I just had nothing to do, and it's so freaking addicting. Like, it's not even good, but you can't stop. And yeah, it's the whole series. The third book, I mean, you get the conclusion finally, but like throughout the whole series, you have this awful love triangle. You know what's going to happen, but like, yeah, it just, it happened. I gave it 2 stars, but I did read the whole thing, so it is on me. La Belle Sauvage by Philip Pullman, which is the first book in the companion series to Is Dark Materials, so it's the Book of Dust series. So it's a prequel basically to the other series, which I grew up reading, reread it as an adult, still good, if not even better as an adult. And I tried a prequel. It was so boring. Like, it felt like a huge prologue. Nothing really happens that is that interesting, was not invested, and I just was so shocked. I don't know where the second book is on that list, but it was worse. But yeah, I gave it 3 stars and 4.15, so not that big of a difference, but still present. I don't think I've been that disappointed about a series more than that one in a long time, like especially the second book. But like the first book was boring too, so. Another mystery thriller that made me give up on Goodreads recommendation, Local Woman Missing. I gave it 2 stars. The average is 4.15. I had been seeing this author actually going around, wanted to give her a shot. Tried her newest release and super forgettable. The writing was not great either. So yeah, not for me. The Sixth Extinction, which is a nonfiction, 4.15 average rating, gave it 2 stars. And that was in 2018, which again, I wasn't as harsh, I feel like. That one also got me some hate on Goodreads. I had to block a few people. People get so weird sometimes on the internet. But I mentioned how boring this book was. I went into it expecting like data and like, again, the Sixth Extinction. Maybe we're going to get some backstory about the other ones. Like, I didn't know what I was going to get, but I was excited because, you know, climate change and everything. But this one specifically following extinction all over the world. The problem is that one, it was really boring. Like the first hour of the audiobook is about rainforest frogs, which don't get me wrong, they're chill, but like it was a bit much. And my main problem is that when you're following these kind of nonfiction where you're following the author traveling around. Chunky's pulling out the cables. So yes, she was traveling all over the world. So of course you have to like her. And she was so detestable. Like, there's a scene, it's burned into my memory. She's at a museum. She wants the person working at the gift shop to give her a tour. And she's really mad when the person says no. And like, I don't know if that's exactly as intense as I remember it, but I just remember being so like weirded out and like, why are you expecting them to do that for you? And you put it in your book and it's making you look bad and you don't realize. I just got really bad vibes from the author. So like, you add that to the fact that it wasn't what I expected, which that's kind of on me, but it was also not really good, didn't have that much data, and it was just about her explorations. And again, not likable. It's just not a good mix. So yeah, I give it 2 stars. The average is much higher. To me, it was overhyped. If you're looking for a good book about climate change, I would recommend the Uninhabitable Earth. The cover is really boring. They need a new cover. But this is the most hopeful book I have read about climate change. So it's not like doom and gloom. So if you're looking to look into it, but don't want to get too depressed. If you have any other recommendations, please let me know. But yeah, that one was bad. Warcross by Mary Lou. 4.14, I gave it 2 stars. I feel mean bashing YA books because I'm too old or something, you know, that's going to be the excuse. But listen, the insta-love-ish story, the romance was basically super painful. I hated the fact that, you know, the main female character is so special because she has rainbow hairs, but that's the only thing interesting about her. And the way she learns to be a hacker, I don't know if it starts making sense later on. I gave up on the book, actually. I shouldn't be on this list, but she just unfocuses her eyes and it just, you know, it's like they're Garfield books as a kid, you know, that you have to do. It was bad, okay, but the romance is what was offensive, and I can spoil it in the comment section if you want to. I didn't even finish the book, so is it a spoiler? I don't know. Oh, Still Heart, the Reckoner series by Brandon Sanderson I was talking about. Yeah, the main teenage boy character, so cringy, the romance, and I had issues with some of the writing. You know how authors sometimes will invent swear words? There were like 3 in there, and like they were repeated so often. It was so annoying. Petty complaint? Maybe. But I gave it 3 point something. The average is 4.14. Okay, a classic sci-fi that also got me. The Forever War by Joe Alderman. Okay, the average is 4.14 again, and I gave it 2 stars. This one was a rough one. Actually, let me grab the book because you need to hear the quote, okay? It's apparently today's word is offensive, but seriously. I think what's offensive is my use of Post-its back in the day. I need to switch those. I wasn't planning on using Post-it, and I just had to when I got to this book. I just found it really sexist and homophobic, and like some people might say it was on purpose, but I feel like there are limits. There are limits. I'm trying to look for that quote, and I keep finding other ones that are just bad. I know some people are going to say it, so I'm going to mention it. The main character is traveling in space, and thank you, Clawdia. And like time relativity, so like he's backward and like, yes, but it happens really early and not always from his point of view. So I don't think that's the best excuse. The context, these people are at war and they just arrived at a new spot for resting. Then unleashed, Stargate's 18 sex-starved men on our women. Compliant and promiscuous by military custom and law, but desiring nothing as much as sleep. So like in the future, in the army, women are being raped and it's totally fine. How do you explain that one? I'm waiting for that. I'm still waiting. People were attacking the other quotes, but that one, no one ever made it make sense. Nobody forced him to put that in there. I've gotten used to open female homosex in the months since we left Earth. Even stopped resenting the loss of potential partners. The men together still gave me a chill, though. Which that one, sure, you could pretend it's the character being, like, old school, whatever. But, like, they're in the future. Anyway, there are a few more like that. But, yes, my issue was that it was boring. And then you add that. The ending was, no. No. The only reason it's still on my shelf is that it matches my other editions. Yeah. Okay, last but certainly not least, at 4.14 still, we have The Last Wish, which is the prequel short story collection for The Witcher. I gave it 1 star. I hated it. I've been so vocal about it, and everyone seems to disagree with me on Goodreads, but so sexist. So, like, this is exactly the kind of fantasy books I don't want to read anymore. Like, every female character is being essayed constantly, and it's just totally normal. And, like, people are like, but it's a dark world. You can create villains without doing that. Like, it's a fantasy world. They have straight up magic and monsters. Like, you can't imagine anything else. At one point, it becomes so fetishized that it feels like the author wants to write that and read that. Like, nobody's forcing you. Like, I'm so over it at this point. I've talked about it so much. But yes, that's it. You can see we're noticing patterns here, but these are books that are quite popular on Goodreads that I don't think are worth the hype. I personally didn't have that experience with them, and I want to make it okay. So you can feel also okay to not always love everything that's really popular. It's normal, honestly. People should not freak out so much about it. So that's it. Like I said, I will link part 1 down below and also the other version that I did the opposite thing. And I will be seeing you in an upcoming video very soon. I'll put more on the screen. Thumbs up, subscribe. I'm gonna go fight some kittens now. Bye.